Hey Thomas, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me and to share your story with me and the audience. So, first of all, of course, how are you feeling today? How are you?
I am good. I am very good. It's been a busy morning, but it's been a good one. Nice and quiet.
Productive. Nice to hear this. Now, as I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, I want to take you through the hero journalist framework. You have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge in using stories for different purposes. And rather than asking you, okay, what was happening in the beginning, what was your initial story, you've already shared it on a lot of different episodes. So, what I'm going to do is briefly highlight some of the things that made an impression on me, and you can correct me after this if I mess up something or if I miss out on something very important.
Okay.
But from what I understand, the beginning of your journey and even as a child, you were very interested in stories. You wanted to become a writer or a teacher, and you've been focused on storytelling as a whole. So, first of all, is that correct? Is that something that it's you found in when you were a kid, when you were a teenager?
Yeah, so I have loved stories ever since I was like 2 or 3 years old. My parents would read stories to me before I could read, and I have loved reading and experiencing stories ever since I could read on my own. So I had a very rough school experience, but stories have always been this focus, this central way for me to communicate and understand the world. So, yes, that's very accurate.
And you mentioned about the rough early years of your childhood, and again, uh, I might point out something incorrectly, so correct me if I'm wrong. But you were diagnosed at a younger age. You at some point you were confused for simply being a little bit different than the other kids and the other teenagers, and obviously this is something feeling different is something that quite some kids go through, but in your case, there was a specific situation that actually made you feel different. It's the first reaction to feel a little bit like a victim, but you found a certain purpose and certain strength to actually turn the point of view around and actually going from a victim to actually trying to overcome those obstacles in front of you. Briefly walk me through and the audience, how what were your memories back then, and if you can connect it with the stories of your favorite heroes, how did those stories help you?
Definitely. So I definitely had some very rough early years. So I was diagnosed with a mental health disorder at the age of 8 after losing someone very significant to me. I always try to, leave out key details just out of respect for other people in my life. But at that point, I went from being my teachers considering me a prodigy, even a genius when it came to writing and storytelling and a variety of other things to after that point, I started being called a failure, being told by my teachers I was never going to succeed. I was probably going to end up in jail because of those mental health issues. I actually remember one of my teachers and I got in a screaming match because she swore that I was a monster and I was awful and I was never going to be in anything. And as a kid at that point, my gut reaction was just to yell back. I remember that was just in elementary school, entering into middle school and high school. Those experiences persisted. There were a lot of teachers who took a strong disliking to me. In that point, though, one of my key focuses was writing and telling stories and experiencing far off worlds and the ways that people could tell stories. And I remember a really key point in my life is when my mother, who has been a champion, helping me through many different situations. Yes, there's been tension and frustration, but there is with many people. She took me to a storytelling festival and I'd always loved stories, but hearing people talk and tell stories like the Iliad or the Odyssey and tell stories in front of a stage, it was a life-changing experience. And so as I got older, I always told people I want to be a storyteller. I wanted to, thrive and be a writer. I never really expected to make a ton of money. I always joke that, my favorite writer is Edgar Allan Poe. He's one of my literary heroes. And I always tell people that's kind of where my expectations are, kind of financially. He died in a gutter, penniless, very sick, and that's my hero. So that's kind of where my, I don't want to end up there, but that's where, making money is in my side
Yeah.
when it comes to art. But also as I got older, I also really experienced the idea of it's not just me who stories reach. It's not just the people around me. Stories are this great connector. They are this great skill and this power that has the ability to make people feel better, to inspire, to uplift. And so that passion really stuck with me. In my later years of high school, I had some really great mentors who encouraged me to keep writing, keep telling stories. And so when I was in my senior year of high school, I published my first book just off
Oh,
of my
nice.
raw talent. And that was really the start. I don't want to go too far because you have a structure, but that was really the start of a very uh, turbulent, but also very unique literary and storytelling journey.
I appreciate the fact that you want to bring it to my structure, but you're already following it. I mean, you mentioned a couple of things. First of all, I love how you approach it with humor, the whole situation, in comparison it with to an example. It's obvious that humor makes those stories lighter. Not every great story is a humoristic one, but those here and there definitely make some memorable impression. But it also sounds like you hit all of the ingredients. Your life story had all of the ingredients to create this beautiful, journey. In the beginning, you were, if we picture you as the hero, you were, before you were aware of the situation and of your condition, you were just a regular kid comparing yourself to all the others. Then, some of the teachers started with those obstacles and start pointing fingers at you. My question here is, do you currently draw some inspiration when you create stories and when you're creating a hero? Do you draw inspiration from those moments? And how do you use those situations that you have been?
So, I mean, I always say that all of the negative situations I went through as a kid, I do pull inspiration from it. I do pull a lot of focus. I'm a big advocate that um, we don't need to hold on to that pain. We don't need to hold on to that sadness. Yes, it can fuel creativity. It can help to inspire us, but over the years, I've also been a really big advocate for moving away from like the tortured artist mindset. I think it's really, really pushed. Many of the great writers, Edgar Allan Poe have kind of created this atmosphere of, a good artists are tortured artists. And I think, especially in the 21st century, going off of my own experiences and my own relationship with my own creativity, I believed that for a long time. I believed that my creativity was at its best when I was miserable or upset. And I kind of blocked myself off from the positivity of being inspired when I was healthier or happier. And to this day, I still pull a lot of inspiration and a lot of motivation towards my art from those pains. But I also pull a lot of it to kind of counteract that torture artist mindset, but also help people have to not experience what I've gone through. So a lot of my writing now, a lot of my motivation is very much kind of painting the idea that we need to create the happy artist or the thriving artist mindset. And as I write and as I go and I kind of evolve as an artist each day, one of the things that I really focus in on is, if we want people to believe in healthy artists or healthy writing or positivity as an artist, we have to exemplify those things. And so when I work
Mm.
with people, youth, adults, whoever, yes, I can create dark, tumultuous, emotional stories, but a big thing that is always present is that idea of hope or humor or something more that can keep us going. I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does, and this creates actually a follow-up question just to tell you a little bit more on the, no, not the negative aspect of it, but those hard moments. A couple of episodes ago, I talked with a guy called Joshua, and his impression on storytelling currently, and specifically in Hollywood. In the past 5-10 years, the stories that Hollywood have been trying to tell are very straightforward. The hero doesn't have those obstacles in the beginning, those hard moments. They are born winners, they are born champions, and the story is quite linear. Do you observe the same thing? And in the follow-up is, how do you balance the negative stuff with the positive part of the story?
So I love that question. So I think the start I think there's a really interesting kind of understanding of storytelling around the world where a lot of people think that like dramatic stories are better than humor or lighthearted stories, and we have this mix. And I think any story really can kind of deviate between linear and complex or simple and fun. There's a lot of different things, and I think it's partly so often storytelling kind of gets reduced down to some very simple mindsets, I believe. But I think part of the flaw in that is, I mean, I would do a lot of work with youth, and I would do with adults as well. But I find a lot of storytelling for like young youth is very kind of very basic. It doesn't have a lot of motivation. It doesn't have a ton of like complexity to it. I mean, I've seen this in TV shows where it's very linear, it's very simple. We have a fart joke here, a simple, funny joke here kind of thing.
Mm.
But I think, if we want our stories to evolve, we also have to, believe in the complexity and believe in the people telling them to. And I think because of that, we can have linear stories that are very complex. But the other side of that is I believe that a large chunk of making stories interesting and compelling and emotional without them being too dark is honoring and accepting our audience, accepting those who we tell the stories to.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, like we've seen this in TV and movies and things, there's a very linear kind of method, bring people back from 20 years ago or reference a story that's really popular and kind of revive it. And I think part of the reason why those are failing on a lot of cylinders for a lot of people is it feels kind of like pandering. It doesn't feel super complex. It doesn't feel like it has a lot of artistry. I think that's why in the United States, where I am, a lot of people are going to like Korean TV or anime or
Mm.
variety of stories because it's so different. And I think as storytellers, if we want to honor our stories, we have to really focus in on how we can be unique and kind of break out of the mold. And it doesn't need to be a constant series of jarring incidents or complex
Yeah.
conversations. I think it really does boil down to how do we honor ourselves? How do we honor our audience? And how do we find ways to kind of explore the human experience in ways that are very different than what's the norm?
Two key things I hear from what you just said. First of all, it always comes down to knowing your audience and honoring them and respecting them by providing them with a good story that they would like. And I'm just saying this as well from my point of view as a marketer. When you're creating a campaign, the first thing in order for your campaign to be successful is focus on the core audience that you want to attract. And obviously, rule number one, if you want to attract everybody, then your story, your campaign, your product is temple for nobody. And the second thing I hear is to, in order to make a story great and memorable, make it authentic and look for the unique stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I would, and I think, an aspect of making a story authentic is also, having the right representation. I think that, I'm a big believer that if we want stories to continue to exist, we have to kind of branch out of the stories we tell. And a big part of that is pulling in community voices that aren't necessarily represented. And I believe that like diversity and representation are crucial. We've seen in a lot of stories there tends to be, a very cut and dry hero's journey, but the more we can bring in people from, from voices that aren't always heard, like the mental health, the neurodiverse, or many other communities, the more different kind of stories we can tell and the more we can tell them authentically. Like I'm gonna be honest, I am a white male who lives in a world that is has a lot of stories kind of made for me, but those stories are often very cut and dry, very simple, not a lot of creativity, and there's a lot of people who those
Mhm.
stories may not resonate with. And I think kind of breaking that mold and saying, how can we bring in people from the BIPOC community or the neurodiverse community and really break this very traditional mold, I think is very important. And I am not going to be the most qualified person to tell those stories all the time. And I think as storytellers, I don't think it's necessarily giving in or pandering. I think it's more being accepting and understanding that we do not have the perspective of others, we cannot tell them as
Mhm.
authentically. And I think it's really important for the audience and for me as someone who consumes a lot of media as well to acknowledge it's not giving in, it's not being weak, it's being mindful. And I think if we start to shift our mindset on that, a lot more people will become more accepting of media. And I know there are reasons why people don't like things, even in a positive light, but the more we use voices, the more we're willing to listen, the better our stories are going to become.
That's a great extension to the main thing that you already highlighted. And you made me come up with a question which is a little bit more selfish. Now, you mentioned about representing those people who are not represented, and we connect with stories that in some way or another are we are familiar with them. Even yes, we are attracted to something that we are familiar with. However, for me personally, one of my favorite stories, favorite movies, series are usually connected to the Italian mafia, The Godfather, The Sopranos, etc., etc. I have nothing in common with that. I'm just a simple guy who went to high school, went to college, started a did 9 to 5 job. Why do we are usually attracted to such stories that are not so relevant to us, but are still unique and interesting?
So I think it's, and I love that question. I think it's a very complex thing. I don't think I'm going to be able to answer that perfectly,
Okay.
but I think for a lot of people, whether we realize it or not, we have a desire to explore things that are outside of our world, outside of our experiences. And that's one of the great things about storytelling. Like, I love fantasy, but I'm not going to know what the world of the Lord of the Rings or
Yeah.
or I haven't watched a ton of it. I know a lot of people love Game of Thrones. And I think the great thing about stories and why we connect to stories that are outside of our scope is because they allow a realm of escapism, but a realm
Yeah.
of exploring things we think we're never going to see, to understand things that for a moment helps us to feel free and explore worlds, go beyond ours. I also really love sci-fi and the idea of like the hero going out into a world like Star Wars, Luke Skywalker going out and defeating great evil, or even just like, the movie Wall-E, a bunch of people love that. It's a story of
Yeah.
redemption and hope for humanity. And I think, if you like drama, there's a degree of like chaos that we like, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think, at our whole, as human beings, we want something different than what we know, and we want to learn about it. We want to expand our knowledge and believe that there is magic or technology or wonder out in the world. And so I think that when it comes to stories, the reason we're drawn to those is because of their power to inspire, to make us cry, to make us want to know things. And I think also there's an idea, I always say as kids, we were born with a desire for creativity for a reason, right? Where as
Yep.
kids, we're born to want to survive, to want to explore, to want to grow, to understand. And creativity is just as much a part of that like human survival. And so I could go on this topic alone, but I think, in that I've explained a lot of different things, but it's part of that human childlike desire to explore, I think, as well.
I agree. It basically draws the adventurous characteristics out of the person. And for somebody, it can be, the golfer. For somebody, it can be Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. But in one way or another, we're looking for another world that we're not so much familiar with, but we want to be there in some way or another. Now, Thomas, I want to move on because I didn't get the chance to mention it in the beginning, but a lot of your current work, besides the creative advocacy and storytelling agency, is that you're looking for ways to help communities, events, and with events about storytelling. And you already mentioned it a couple of times, we for youth and for adult as well. Now, uh, I would like to briefly introduce us with your work, with your concept, and the follow-up question on the web show that like what are the benefits that you see out of those storytelling events? How are they helpful for the well-being of others?
And I mean, the biggest things that I've seen with that's helped so many people is help people to find a community, to help people find and develop their voice, their exploration, their desires. I've mentioned, in my work that storytelling is this great capacity to connect people. And I think that's very true. But among that, what I've also seen in helping people find their creative voice or their motivation is also helping people find like real life skills like problem solving, math, creativity, as well as public speaking and mindfulness skills.
Um,
My work has really been blessed by the desire and the focus for to help people understand and have a fun time, but it's also really backed up by very much proven methods of education and psychology and a wide variety of other skills. And so some of my favorite moments at my events in my work have simply seen, youth or adults show up upset or worried or anxious. And at the end of the event, they're happy, they're laughing, I mean, I've seen youth show up and at one point they're very upset, and another they're dancing and twirling and having fun. And so my events and my work are very complex, very hard to nail down in a very short period of time, but really centered on the desire to help people find their community, their temporary home, that world they want to explore, while also developing skills that they really might not think that they are.
Now, you mentioned a couple of those skills. I just will try to list them in my head and for the audience as well. But one of them, public speaking and presenting yourself properly and communicating properly. You also mentioned math skills, if I'm not mistaken. How exactly would stories contribute to your math skills?
So a lot of what I do is very gentle, very like patience based and empathy based storytelling. And a big part of that is centered around Dungeons and Dragons, so a tabletop role playing game or other role playing games. And so that game has a lot of rolling of dice, addition, and public speaking, and a wide variety of other skills built in. And so, through those practices of those tabletop role playing games, it provides people the opportunity and the space to practice their addition, practice their math through adding up numbers, through rolling of dice. And I found part of the reason the space is so helpful for that is that focus of I'm going to sit back, let you try to attempt it. And then if people need help, I will guide them through a process of that active application through a very patient and empathic manner. And part of that practice is really giving people the opportunity to understand if they make mistakes, it's not going to hinder them. They're not going to get in trouble. They're not going to get made fun of. And as me as an event facilitator, I'm not going to punish them by giving them a bad grade or have them worry about, if they have a problem 3, 4 sessions in, that they're going to be disrespected or talked down to. And I found there's a real power in a communal space that is centered on patience, empathy, and understanding.
This draws to me a very similar comparison to Warcraft and the use of playing role-playing games as a whole. Video games, you mentioned Dungeons and Dragons, which is obviously that's a video game, but in a real life game. The main thing about the main benefits about those games and those communities within this virtual life is the community that you build with others and pretty much the same life skills that you can develop there, right? Using logic to come up with a solution, improving your communication in order to coordinate the tasks, the end goal that you want to achieve, and working in team to in order to move the needle and actually get to the end goal. Do you have any favorite stories like this, online stories, virtual stories?
Yeah, definitely. So I have used a wide variety of virtual stories. I've used video games. I've used virtual calls. I really do believe that there is a very strong power in having a virtual space and centering in on the use of that. I've seen a lot of people grow from video games. I've seen a lot of people grow from online classes. And because of that, I think in those spaces for a lot of people, oh, actually, I know there's a lot of people who are still very worried about showing up to physical spaces, to playing games in person. And I think that there is this real power in creating a virtual space built off of the mindsets I've mentioned. And I think in stories and all of those spaces, virtual MMORPGs or massive multiplayer online games, the thing that I think is really powerful about them when they're used well is they can develop all of the skills that I've mentioned, all of these talents. And I think it just takes someone who is helping to kind of define the boundaries of those spaces in an effective manner.
Kind of like a controlled environment where you can give the best to the community, to the students that you're in the community, and allowing them to take the necessary skills, to take the necessary lessons to actually apply them in real life. Correct?
Mhm.
Great. Now I want to move on to the next step of the each hero that goes on their journey. Now we covered a lot on the obstacles and how you draw inspiration, how you go through them, uh, and the next step usually is finding a mentor, finding a guide, or just something that helps you push through those obstacles and go to your adventure. Could you share some of those people who inspired you and who you already mentioned there were teachers who pushed you to stick with storytelling and writing? Who are they and what did you learn from them actually? How did they help?
So I have had many mentors, many people I look to for inspiration, for ideas. Throughout my life, I have had some very valuable inspiration. So I mentioned Edgar Allan Poe. I've always looked up to the storyteller Odds Botkins, but in my life, I've had some very key people. So in high school, I had a teacher who, my math teacher, who worked very hard for with me to get used to math. I'm not a math person, but in that he was a very positive force that help me to identify my talents. I also had an English teacher in high school who, even when I was struggling, she was very tough, but she was very important in motivating me and helping me to understand my creative voice. And as I've gotten older, I've had some very important key figures in my life, very important mentors who have been a force for light and positivity in my life and have helped me keep my mindset in the right way. And I also have my best friend has been a motivator. She is my big sister at this point and has really helped me to understand the severity of certain things that I've done wrong and the
Mm,
importance of the idea of redemption and understanding. None of these people, I would say, have ever been perfect or have not, held me to some very high standards. And I think there's a real power of having people who are a positive force in your life who don't expect you to just, skate through life. People who expect you to, live up to very high standards are very rare in this world, I believe. And
mm,
at the same time, those high standards have helped me to have higher standards of myself. And in the last several years of my professional career, one of the great things that I've had in myself is an expectation for me to do my best. And I know it's not traditional, but I've kind of considered myself and numerous people I've worked alongside as very close mentors as I've learned to get better at events, and they've also inspired me to hold myself potentially to a standard higher than anyone else.
I've always kept this love-hate relationship with the idea of, all right, you're doing good enough, but there's still more potential and higher standard that you can reach. Like I do appreciate it, but I'm sure you probably also had those moments where you think, yes, I know there's always a higher standard that I could reach, but I'm also good enough on this level as well. Why should I keep pushing? Why should I go on? If you're ambitious, you have to go on, especially if you have others believing in you. But how do you push through those difficult moments?
So I definitely agree. I think there is a place where good enough is quite healthy. I have grown up around a lot of people who have said, you're good here, now get to here. And I think
Yeah.
there's power in that, but I also want to enforce the idea that if you're happy with your skill set, then be happy with it. I have a very intense self perfectionism. It's part of the reason I hold myself to a very high status, but I've also had a lot of self imposed toxicity in that pursuit of being better. And at this point in my life, I kind of describe myself as a self a functioning perfectionist. I am able to draw boundaries with my perfectionism. And as people tell me I can do better, I've had many moments where it's like, okay, I want to celebrate. I want to honor where I am at now. And that's also very, as self perfectionism can be very dangerous, it can be very worrisome. And for those of you listening, if you have a very rough relationship with your perfectionism, I very much encourage you to learn how to sit in the moment and just celebrate what you have done in the capacity that you have done. I have there have been many moments where I've been way too hard on myself, way too mean, because especially with people telling me I can do better. Now, on the flip side of that, I do want to encourage people to understand that there is another side to it of when we can become stagnant and miserable because we stop working on ourselves or stop getting better. And so there's a very hard mix, a very hard way to get into the middle of that and find a good center, but it is possible. It's just, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of continual work because both sides can be very dangerous.
And just want to add to this point that when you want to grow further and develop yourself further and develop your skills, it is good to have a specific end goal in mind.
Mhm.
This will outline a little bit better what exactly you need to do, what exactly you need to achieve to get to this point and to stay and to get to this stage of, all right, I did a lot in the past 1 to 3 years. I'm good enough at this point. I can slow down a little bit and recharge those batteries. And this being said, I want to ask you now for a lot of the Bulgarian folklore, the Bulgarian stories, the end goal usually is the golden apple or the princess in the kingdom. We know about the warrior who is going to retire with a lot of honor and live a peaceful life. How does this end goal look for Thomas? If you're not still with the Edgar Allan Poe, dream at the end.
I think for me right now, the end goal isn't, I love the idea of like that golden apple or that happy place. I think my end goal right now, and it can change radically throughout the day, but I've always been someone where I want to get to a place where I am continually contented. There's a lot of, especially in the United States, there's a lot of idea about being happy or that happily ever after mindset. And I very much like to challenge that. I think happiness as an emotion is not meant to last, as is joy. And we as human beings need to understand that being happy all the time is not necessarily healthy either. There's a reason why being resilient and pain and sorrow can be really valuable skill to gain. And so for me, I think when I get to a point, at least for a while, when I get to a point where I can sit back, look at my life, look at everything I've achieved, and feel contented, secure, and safe. That's the end goal for now. And I think that's going to
Okay.
change eventually. It's going to grow. It's very important for that to change. And I think the definition of that contentedness needs to grow and change. But for me, that's kind of where the end goal is. I've done everything I can
Okay.
do. I'm contented. I look at my life and I'm not necessarily happy, but I know it's where I need to be.
Yeah, you said in the last sentence. I just want to point out that this is different than being happy all the time. As you mentioned, being happy all the time can can be unhealthy just because you cannot draw the comparison of being happy and miserable. Thomas, I want to ask you actually as a storyteller, what is one story, either fictional or from your life, that you always go to when you need a little bit motivation, when you're stuck? You think about this specific story and aha moment hits you.
So I don't know if this is going to be one that a lot of people are going to say, but there is a book by Dr. Seuss called All the Places You'll Go. It's a very simple book about a person who is on a journey. Very simple child story, but very relevant. And it's about a person who continually finds new places and all these lands to explore. And a really common phrase throughout it is all the places you go. And part of the reason for this is because that has been a book that has popped up in my life at several very dark points, but also several very important points. It's very funny because several people who have been very influential in my life have either given me a card that references that book or have given me the book itself. When I graduated high school, my high school actually gifted me that book with a special note in it saying, "This is going to be you." And people told me I'd never graduate high school. When I graduated college, I got a card for that. And it just popped up at very significant points in my life. And so when I go to that book and I look at it, it's a reminder that I have many places I can go in life and helps me to recenter. And it brings me a lot of joy to think about.
Great. Thanks for sharing this. I haven't heard it before. I'm definitely going to do it as a test to take a look at it. Now, from our conversation, what I get and what's the main lessons that I get is that in order to make storytelling work for you, make sure that you focus on the authentic part and the unique part of the story that you're trying to convey. You can draw inspiration from a lot of places, but if you focus on the authentic part and you hone your story over and over again and your storytelling skills, this will help not only in communication but in a lot of other fields as well. Is there something else that I couldn't ask you that you think is very important to share, but I just didn't think of it?
Yeah, one last thing that I really want to say is this world needs more storytellers, especially with unique, powerful voices. But we especially need storytellers, and in this day and age, that have stories of hope and
Mm,
perseverance and empathy and care, and people who are willing to go out into the world and not necessarily radically change the world or seek to become multi-billionaires. We need people who are
yeah,
going to go out into the community and inspire and uplift and show genuine compassion to our fellow human beings. And I think especially in the next few years, wherever we are in the world, we're going to need that more and more. We're going to need people who are going to go out and spread kindness. So if that is something you feel up to and you have the talents, the skills, the time, even if it's just talking to a friend and sharing that story,
yeah.
there's a lot of power in that. And I think it's so important to understand that storytelling really does offer power and hope to the world.
Thomas, I love this. It is very important that even if you focus and help on one, two people, this is still a very, very, very good job. Everybody's trying to help the whole world to be those popular people that everybody bows to. But even if you make one person smile, your best friend smile with a story or a humor, a joke, whatever, and he tells or she tells you, "Hey man, my day became much better because we spent those 15, 20 minutes. This is good enough at this point." Thomas, thanks a lot for taking the time to tell your story and not only what you went through, but also how you draw inspiration from it and how exactly to apply our skills to tell better stories. It was a blast for me and I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you. It's been an absolute joy for me as well.
Thank you. See ya.